do this. Hello and welcome. I am so glad you are with me today. My name is Judith Cobb, and today we are going to talk about iridology and is it a diagnostic tool? We're going to dig a little bit deeper than that and talk about what value does iridology have when we are making a wellness assessment and when we're creating a list of our client needs and creating wellness programs. I'm here to tell you, with 40 years of being an iridologist under my belt and having 3 different styles of iridology under my belt, having 40 years as being a practicing nutritionist and a practicing herbalist, that I'm just going to say it right out there that iridology is a very valuable tool, but not in the way that so many people on social media are using it. And that is a bit of a challenge. Let's start off first with defining the word diagnosis. The word diagnosis actually means to name a disease, right? And so when we look at that as holistic practitioners, we're not allowed to actually name diseases. We are not allowed to diagnose unless we are licensed medical practitioners. So here in the province that I live in Canada, the cold north, true and free, or whatever we want to say. Very cold here today. If you're a licensed naturopath, you can make a diagnosis. In many states in the USA, licensed naturopaths are also considered first-line medical care providers, so they can make a diagnosis. But for people like myself, master herbalist, natural nutrition clinical practitioner, I don't have that privilege of being able to name diseases. I know a lot, but I don't get to name a disease. When we talk about doctors, whether they're medical doctors or naturopaths, they run tests, they analyze the results, they come up with the name of the disease, and then they create their treatment protocol, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes based on the disease name they have applied. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing to do, but we need to remember that stats suggest diagnostic errors of up to 50% at places like the Mayo Clinic. In the British Medical Journal, they report diagnostic errors of up to 20%. When someone's passed away and they do an autopsy, they go, oops, we made a mistake. Okay, so, and I'm not making light of this. Really, I'm not. It must be very, very difficult when you've got so many diseases that have so many similarities. I can only imagine that the possibility of making a mistake is very real, and it's probably one that weighs very heavily on people who have that licensed responsibility to do that. So as we look at this, we maybe don't want to, as holistic practitioners, maybe we don't want to actually name diseases. We've all heard cases where once the disease label is attached, it's nearly impossible to get it removed. And then all of the treatment is done based on the disease label that's been attached. So let's look at some iris photos and see what we can diagnose. And I'm using that term very loosely, or let's look and see how we are going to use iridology. We're going to look at cases that have had medical diagnoses from doctors where they were labeled with things like ADHD or polycystic ovarian syndrome or sphincter of Oddi dysfunction, and see what actually shows up. Just before we get into that, I'm just going to put this out there that if you are interested in keeping up with these little webinars that we do, typically twice a week, if you want to be kept up as to when they're happening, what the topics are, just hop on over to iridology.education. And when that little pop-up box pops up and asks if you'd like to receive the constitutional iridology map download, just opt in for that. That will add you to the list to be kept in the loop. Alrighty, so here we have the iris images of a boy who was 10 years old when we took these photos, and his medical diagnosis was ADHD. What we want to ask here again is, what is the value of constitutional iridology as an assessment tool in a holistic wellness practice. We also want to recognize that it doesn't matter if you're a herbalist, a nutrition coach, an aromatherapist, or a naturopath. If you stay with me, you'll see what kinds of insights you can gain from doing a constitutional iridology assessment with a client. And that is so important, because what I see online are a lot of posts from people posting iridology photos and saying things like, please tell me what's wrong, or tell me about these eyes and what can I do about it? Or they'll say, please tell me what supplements I should take and what foods I should eat. Additionally, we see a lot of iridologists actually diagnosing and saying, oh, you've got high blood pressure, you've got this, you've got that, you've got the other, and prescribing from the photos without any background information. In 40 years of doing this, I'm here to tell you, bad idea. Bad idea. Iridology is not a crystal ball. It is not a party game. It's actually not a diagnostic tool. It's an assessment tool. We need background information for us to actually understand the context inside of which we are going to do the analysis. So we can't just post pictures up there. I couldn't just post these up there and say, this is a 10-year-old, and say, analyze these eyes, because really, depending on the nutritional status of this person, depending on so many other things as well, family history and whatnot, we are going to have different insights. If I don't have background information, if I don't know this is a child who's been diagnosed with ADHD, I say they live in the sympathetic zone. They tend to be a bit of an introvert. There may be some issues with liver processing carbs. The skin may not detoxify well. And I can do really general things like that. But I can't come up with the assessment saying this kid's got ADHD. Right? Because I've seen a lot of eyes like this where that would not be a correct assessment. So we actually can't diagnose anything from the eyes. Iridology is an assessment tool. Have I said that enough times? I hope I have. The irides teach us what questions to ask. The eyes don't actually give us any answers, and they absolutely don't give us disease names. On their own, they don't even tell us what recommendations to make for a client. I know, and when you see all of these posts on Facebook, it's just, or on Instagram or wherever, it's frightening. So all of these people that we're going to talk about today are clients of mine. I've done case histories on them. I understand where they're coming from and what their needs are. These images on the screen are those of a 10-year-old boy who was diagnosed by his doctor as having ADHD. Now, the vast majority of children who have the doctor diagnosis of ADHD also have these rings that go around and around and around. That is not to say every child who has these has ADHD. What these rings really tell us is that this person lives in the sympathetic response, which means that they are always ready for the next crisis. What that also means is that if they are not well nourished, they may not be able to filter stimuli. Let's put that in the context of a 10-year-old boy. A 10-year-old boy who's in a classroom, a traditional classroom, sitting at a desk with lots of distractions from children that are doing other things and pencils dropping and the teacher up at the front and, interesting things in his desk that he wants to play with maybe. Those things are stimuli that can make this child, that can distract this child, that can give this child that diagnosis of at least ADD. When the child also needs physical stimulation in order to stay calm and focused, that's where we get the ADHD happening in here. So as we look at this, we also want to note that this child has these lines that radiate outward. Now, if you have done any North American iridology, you might call those parasite lines. In constitutional iridology, we absolutely do not call them that. They are not an indication of parasites at all. They, however, do intensify the interpretation of these rings that go around. So we know that these children who have these markers together have an increased possibility of being distractible, of being probably kinesthetic learners. These are the children that if you could literally have them bounce a ball against the wall while they practice their multiplication tables. Do they even do that anymore? Oh my goodness, dating myself here. That, 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 4 is 16, things like that, that using their body will actually help to calm them and help them to learn more efficiently. Making them sit in a desk with their hands folded on the desk, very old school, is going to drive them crazy because they need the physical stimulation in order to keep their mind on track. The physical stimulation actually literally helps them to not get distracted. When we see these markers in anybody, let alone if it's a 10-year-old boy, we understand instantly that this person burns through B vitamins, vitamin C, calcium, and magnesium very quickly. What do you know about those nutrients? I know you've got the wheels turning. You know that those are all nutrients that feed the nervous system and that support the adrenal glands, right? And so when we see these markings in anybody, and again, including a 10-year-old boy who's got this medical diagnosis, we know we have to give them the B vitamins. And sometimes we need to make sure that we're using the right chemical form of those B vitamins. And oh, it's so lovely to have so many people joining us on Instagram and on Facebook. Thank you for being there, and on the webinar. We know we need to give these children their B vitamins, their vitamin C, their calcium, and their magnesium. We know how the body uses those, so we understand when we need to time things. We know what forms these people need these in, because not all B vitamins are created equal. Not all forms of vitamin C are bioavailable. Not all forms of calcium and magnesium are actually useful by the body, and our body has different times in its circadian rhythm that it is more able to use the nutrients and assimilate them fully. When people that have these indicators in their eyes are properly nourished, they do very well. They like to have to-do lists. They like to check them off and accomplish things. They like to have a direction in everything they're doing. Their day's success is based on how much they accomplished, how on track were they. But this set of markers isn't enough to diagnose ADHD. And again, as herbalists or nutritionists or iridologists, we can't even diagnose that. We're not allowed to do that. But, when the parents come in and say, my child is getting lots of warnings from the teacher that they're distracted, that they're interrupting other students, that they've got problems that way, then we want to ask more questions about how well do they pay attention when they're really involved? Do they like physical things? Another thing that I learned, and it's an eye not terribly dissimilar from this, was one of my sons. This is not my son that we're looking at, but in grade 2, he was terribly distracted. And his teacher had put a seclusion screen around him so that he could focus better, which really ticked me off. She said he's always asking the other children, he's always talking to the other kids. And as I listened to him read, I recognized there was a problem. He would miss words completely. He'd miss the beginning of the line. He'd miss the end of the line. Things, unless the print was super huge, in which case he could read well. But the smaller it gotten, by grade 2, it's getting smallish, or second grade for those of you from the US, he was struggling. So I took him to a doctor who specialized in eye tracking, in vision, in how you use your eyes, not how you focus your eyes. And we discovered he didn't know how to track properly. His muscles hadn't been trained. So we did tons of therapy. It was like $2,000 worth of therapy that year, and a half an hour of practice every night to teach him tracking. And guess what? He wasn't ADD. He wasn't ADHD. As soon as he could track, he was fine. He was asking the other students, what are we supposed to do here? Because he'd read the instructions and it wouldn't make sense because he was missing words, right? As soon as he could track, the next year he read the first Harry Potter book on his own and could tell me the entire story, what it meant, and he became a very fluent reader. When we have a child that has ADD or ADHD, what we want to remember is this is not someone who's going to grow into an adult who can sit behind a desk well. This is an adult who needs to use his body. He's going to do better doing training in a gym or landscaping where he's actually doing the work, or doing surveying where he's outside using his body. He's going to be really great as a school teacher who works with special needs kids who need physical stimulation, or a phys ed teacher even. He's going to have sensitivities in those areas. There are so many other imbalances that can contribute to ADD and ADHD, and that add understanding. And when we understand these markers and we get to have that conversation with the parents and with the child, we then can understand the diagnosis from the doctors, but we cannot make that diagnosis from what we see in the eyes. We can talk about the likelihood that their adrenal glands may be a little more challenged because of them being more of a sympathetic constitution, if you will. And we have to understand that context to be able to ask the right questions, right? So this child actually, when we did the nutrient things, when we got the diet straightened around, got rid of the simple carbs, increased the protein, got the B vitamins and the calcium and the magnesium, and we added some really high potency omegas to him, I got a phone call or an email from his mom. She had broken her ankle and was confined, could not wait there for 6 weeks, so was literally stuck, right? She had a job, but she had to take the time off. So she was at home and she was getting bored out of her mind, and she invited her son to come and play old maid with them. She sent me this email after this evening, and she said, normally we'd get partway through and he would already be off saying he's done, go do something else. But we'd started this protocol with him and he made it through one game. That's an improvement. He said, Mom, can we play again? He made it through game number 2. That's really cool. And he made it partway through game number 3 before he said, you know, Mom, I'm done. She was so excited that he was doing so much better and could attend because the eyes told me where his inherent metabolic challenges would be. I didn't need to hear ADD, ADHD. I needed to see his eyes. I needed to ask the parents what they saw for behavior. Those are things you can't do from just an eye picture posted on social media. This is one of my clients, also female. She was in her late 20s when we took these pictures. She had a medical diagnosis of PCOS. And that's one major cause of infertility. It stands for polycystic ovarian syndrome. We're going to look at 4 cases that were all PCOS. You're going to see how different the eyes are, and that's going to help you understand that we cannot make a diagnosis from the eyes. We need to talk to the person. We need to understand some of their background. So each of these eyes has indicators that can help explain some of the issues that might be going on and why they've got the diagnosis from the doctor that they got. Now, this client actually had experienced, before she came to me, just, in the few months before, she had experienced tremendous weight gain, and her menstrual cycles were getting further and further and further and further apart. As we look at her eyes, we see that she is polyglandular, which means she has many of these closed flower petals attached to the collarette. And that area, that band right around the outside of the collarette, correlates to things, or can correlate, can give us insight into things like blood sugar balance and hormone balance. And obviously from the weight gain, it was pretty indicative that her diet was out of balance, that she was eating the wrong things, and it was triggering some blood sugar responses that were putting weight on her. When she revamped her diet, and she went hardcore because she was trying to get pregnant and she really wanted that. When she revamped her diet, got her blood sugars under control, the weight came off, her menstrual cycle really balanced out beautifully, and she was able to conceive. Now, looking at these eyes, we knew we had to work with blood sugars because of what we see there. We also had her chart her temperatures to confirm where the issues were with her menstrual cycle, and that worked very well for her. This is another client of mine. She also had a medical diagnosis of polycystic ovarian syndrome and type 2 diabetes. Her cycles averaged about 75 days apart. She did not have a weight problem. She was very slender, very petite. When we look at her eyes, though, we see, again, these rings coming around. And so the first question I needed to ask her here was, how do you handle stress? And there were many things in her eyes that told me that what she really needed was, in part, to get her diet under control, but also to get B vitamins in the right format so that she could use them properly. So when she didn't have enough Bs, which was all the time before she started working with me, she found that she was very stressed out. She had a bit of a high stress job that was kind of getting to her. And then she would medicate with sugars and carbohydrates. So she was kind of doing it to herself somewhat. We gave her the B vitamins in the right form for her. And we also got her diet straightened around. She didn't need to lose weight, but her husband, bless his heart, he went on the same eating protocol because he recognized that it was a healthier way of eating than what they were doing. And he lost 20 pounds. He was pretty stoked about that. As we did this and got her B vitamins in place, got her diet corrected, her cycles went from 75 days down to 35 days. She got pregnant in spite of the fertility clinic telling her that with being type 2 diabetic and PCOS, she would never get pregnant without their help. And that they told her that when she got pregnant with their help, she would absolutely develop gestational diabetes. Well, she got pregnant without using the fertility clinic, and she did not develop gestational diabetes, which the doctors were astounded by. She delivered a very healthy 7-pound baby, which is great because that birth weight tells us that mom's blood sugars were also very nicely balanced. He was term, and she only had a 3-hour labor and delivery from start to finish. Pretty amazing. Now, I want you to compare this eye to the next one we're going to look at, which is also that dark brown eye type. This is a 20-year-old girl who doesn't understand a lot about fertility just yet. So we've kind of started working on that with her. She has something called a gateway arch. Now, I'm going to move my camera closer for those of you who are on Instagram so you can actually see this marking really well. We have right here a part of the collarette that rises up off the surface of the iris. Okay, that is a gateway arch. A gateway arch tells us this person, be male or female, of course in this case we're talking female, has a significant increased risk of blood sugar issues. Now this young lady came to me primarily for weight. She was gaining weight and she didn't like it. I mean, what 20-year-old who's in university wants to get chubby, right? So I asked her about her diet. She said, we went through it and it's very high carb. We asked about her lifestyle. She had no physical activity at all. She lived on campus, so no problems there. And she was eating on the campus meal plan. When I asked her about her cycles, she said they were regular. And I said, do you have one cycle every month? And she said, yeah, but they're about 4 weeks late. And I'm going, wait a minute, that means they're not one a month. I said, so does that mean they're really about 8 weeks apart? And she said, yes. So her menstrual cycles were about 60 days, which again, the medical bench line for polycystic ovarian syndrome for the first assessment is less than nine or fewer cycles a month, or a year rather, 9 or fewer a year, which of course at 60 days, she would only have 6 a year, which puts her squarely into PCOS, although I can't say that. What I did say is, if you tell that to a medical doctor who knows their reproductive stuff, they will tell you that you likely have PCOS, but I cannot tell you that. How's that for getting around it? So she'd been to her doctor and he wasn't concerned about her weight or her menstrual cycles or anything. He just, I don't know what he was concerned about. Now, this young lady does want to have babies eventually, so she was interested in getting on track. We worked on her diet and getting her off the high carb program she was on, got her not on the meal plan, but got her actually walking a mile to the grocery store every couple of days to bring that back to her apartment where she had a small fridge and a hot plate and she could actually make food. We worked with her, like that walk to the grocery store, right? We got her walking extra on campus, just walking for pleasure. She was actually going to university in Hawaii, so the weather was not a problem. And so we got her doing the right things to actually get her cycles coming down and get the weight coming off. But we wouldn't have known that she had blood sugar challenges, really, if not for this. We knew her diet was not great, but this was a part of what was helping her to crave carbs. So by doing the diet correction, we can override what her inherent potential is and help her body to function better. So important. So all of those last three eyes all had a medical diagnosis, ultimately, of polycystic ovarian syndrome. They were really different. So we couldn't possibly assess or diagnose PCOS from the eyes. But when we understood what their concerns were, and when we looked at their eyes, and when we had that conversation to find out what their menstrual cycles were doing, we could address the problem, whether we called it PCOS or not, and we could get to the bottom of the problem. And that's what we needed to do. This is one more client who did not have PCOS, actually, although let me rephrase that. She did not have a medical diagnosis of PCOS. She also did not have classical symptoms of PCOS. However, she had tried to get pregnant for a full year and had no luck. But she has a few tiny marks in her eyes that suggest she actually falls into what we would call the MTHFR category. So her diet was really good, and so was her general health hygiene. She's physically active, she eats organic, she eats a lot of vegetable matter, has a very heavy vegetable-based protein, eats a little bit of animal protein, but not much. So really a good diet, was drinking enough water, wasn't drinking alcohol, wasn't drinking coffee, no refined carbs. I mean, really, I want to live with her. Her diet's better than mine, right? And so as we were talking and we found out what was going on, I suggested from some markings that I saw that she might want to get tested for MTHFR. Now, here where I live, there are no labs that will run the MTHFR test. They used to, but they don't anymore because it became trendy and the doctors couldn't see any use for it being trendy, so the labs stopped doing it. So this client did 23andMe. By the time she did the 23andMe and got her results back, she was successfully pregnant. We had gotten the B vitamins into her in the right amount. We had rebalanced her proteins just a little. We were doing some herbs to help her with ovulation and with holding on to a fertilized egg so that it would implant so she could grow a baby. So halfway through her pregnancy, she does 23andMe and she contacts me just in a panic. Now you'll notice, now these are frontally lit, so some of the markings are a little bit masked by that, but we have some little bits of contraction furrows that show up even with frontal lighting. If we had side lighting, we'd see those way more clearly and we would know they were much bigger. And so I knew she ran high anxiety at the best of times. She has a job that's very demanding that runs with a lot of anxiety as well. So she got this report back. She sends me this email where I can tell she is in full-on panic mode. Oh my goodness, I have this. Does this mean my pregnancy is good? What's happening to my baby? Is my baby safe? What's going on here? And I said, whoa, take a deep breath. Calm down. Just take a deep breath. I said, I suspected from what I saw in your eyes that the MTHFR is a part of who you are. I've been addressing that with the right kinds of B vitamins right since the time we met, from our very first appointment. And it took her about 9 months of working with me to actually get pregnant. I said, I've got you covered. We've dealt with that. And as long as you continue to do this with your diet and this with these particular supplements, we can make your body think it doesn't have MTHFR. And she went, really? I said, yeah, I've had your back since the get-go. So that was very cool because, you know, when we look at her eyes, she could be prone to some blood sugar imbalances as well, right? She could be prone to hormonal imbalances, but for her, because her diet was so great, those weren't the issues. It was really the MTHFR. I need to throw this in here because if I was to ask you, where's the sphincter of Oddi and what does it do? I would be surprised if even 10% of you went, pick me, I know the answer, right? And so as we look at this, we need to discover where it is and what it does. We have the liver, we have the stomach tucked in behind the liver. The liver produces bile and sends it down through the common bile ducts, the hepatic bile ducts rather, and stores it in the gallbladder. When you have something fatty coming through into the duodenum, so the top part of the small intestine, the gallbladder sends the concentrated bile out down the common bile duct and into the small intestine to emulsify those fats. Now, the problem we have is right here where that bile duct, that common bile duct joins the duodenum, we have a little sphincter called the sphincter of Oddi. It's an interesting problem that happens that many people who have their gallbladder removed because it's full of gallstones end up developing a sphincter of Oddi dysfunction. And what that sphincter of Oddi dysfunction means is that that sphincter of Oddi starts to constrict and it forms scar tissue as it gets tighter and tighter and tighter. Now imagine if the sphincter of Oddi gets so small that two things happen. Number one, the bile that is just dripping down now from the liver, because there's no gallbladder anymore, remember, the bile is dripping down, but the sphincter is getting so tight that the bile doesn't come out easily. That's problem number one. And problem number two is there is some musculature in here, in this ductwork, like a blood vessel that wants to push that bile out. So that's pushing, and the more it pushes, the more this sphincter of Oddi spasms shut. Do you see the problem here? The pain and the discomfort that can happen with this? So this fellow came to me, it's been a client of mine for years, and there was a little gap in there where he wasn't coming in, and that's fine. That happens with a lot of my clients. They disappear for a while and then they come back. But he came in, he said, yeah, I had my gallbladder removed and now I've got this problem. And I think it's a sphincter of Oddi dysfunction. He'd spent a lot of time online doing research. So I had to go do research because I had never heard of sphincter of Oddi. I had no idea it could dysfunction. And I learned everything I've just shared with you. And so when I look at his eyes, we need to be aware of a couple of things. The first off, if we were to see anything in the eyes to do with this, it would be inherent. It would not be as a result of the surgery, right? So as we look at this, and we look at his eyes, again, he's a 58-year-old male. He had his gallbladder removed 5 years prior to taking this photo. And I had photos from before that as well. And now we want to look and see what we are playing with here. Now, the sphincter of Oddi does not have a specific point in the iris, right? It would be somehow related to where the gallbladder is and where the duodenum is. So if we look at liver gallbladder, which shows up between 7:30 and 8 here, we see nothing really totally remarkable that would suggest much of an issue. We've got a teeny tiny pigment there, but that predated the surgery. Everything that we've seen here predated the surgery. So there's nothing in here that would have warned us that he was headed for sphincter of Oddi problems. There's nothing here that says he's had gallbladder surgery. There's nothing even here that tells us he should have gallbladder problems. Now, when you know about gallbladder, you know that gallbladder is where we store our anger, bitterness, and resentment, and that the gallbladder is especially where we store unresolved anger. If you met this gentleman, you would totally get it. On the outside, he is the sweetest, kindest, most thoughtful man on the face of the planet, bar none. He's totally cool, calm, and collected. When you talk to him about some family dynamics, you see the anger surface. When you talk to him about some things that happen in his work, you see the anger surface, but he very quickly shuts it down. So that's unresolved anger that got to his gallbladder, that's stored there, that caused the gallstones, right? And so we have that tendency in his personality. But when we see this, there's nothing here to say sphincter of Oddi was an issue. There's no indication of surgery because that's not inherent. There's no indication of gallbladder problem because the anger issues, while they may be inherent, he has the ability to resolve the anger if he learns the skills, right? And so that's not going to show up in his eyes necessarily either. So the eyes can be used to help point us in the right direction, but sometimes they don't have the information they need because the eye rides are inherent. They are not situational. And so we do need to have conversations with people to understand why their body is responding the way it is, to help us understand what things we need to work with first, what kind of a nutrition protocol, what kind of a supplement protocol we need to be suggesting for them, what kind of a lifestyle protocol. So with this gentleman, and I haven't seen him in a while, you know, Calgary's got a really bad economy and lots of people are losing their jobs. So some of the clients are kind of not coming in because they can't afford it right now, which I totally understand. But with this gentleman, one of his pieces of homework was to spend some time doing whatever he needed to. And if it meant spending his wellness money on going for counseling to learn how to resolve the anger issues, so be it. I would rather he went there next than come to me for supplements, because learning how to resolve the anger issues is more of a long-term remedy for him than me giving him things to help him with digesting his fats, although digesting fats is very important. So where does that really leave us then as we look at the eyes, as we look at, is iridology a diagnostic tool? Well, it leaves us with at the point that says iridology is an assessment tool. It actually points the way to the questions we should be asking. As we get the answers to that, as we have a deeper understanding of our client based on what we've seen on the eyes and based on what our client has shared with it, it suggests and guides us in the dietary recommendations and the lifestyle recommendations and the supplement recommendations that we should be making, or that we could draw on to help this body reach its inherent potential for an organ, for the system, or for the body as a whole, right? Iridology is not diagnostic. It's an assessment tool that helps to guide us in the process. Just want to put this in here. Registration is not open yet, but just wanted to throw it out there that Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology will be starting up again mid-April. The January start date has already closed enrollment. And the date, you see, April 16th is probably not correct. We're probably going to switch that and see if we can switch the time to make it useful for people who are in Australia, because we're getting a lot of interest from Australia, and that's very cool. So just kind of keep your ears open, especially if you're in Australia, because we're trying to plan one that will work for you. It doesn't really work well if you've got a time that's 4 a.m. Australian Eastern. I mean, give me a break, right? Who's going to get up at 4 a.m.? I totally get it. So with that, my friends, I've seen no comments come in, but I thank you so much for your attention today. Thank you for being with me, and I look forward to seeing you on Tuesday when we do another webinar, Instagram Live, and Facebook Live. We will see you then. Take good care and have a fabulous weekend. And if you're in the cold north, true and free, stay warm, keep antifreeze in your gas line, and don't go out without your extra boots, mitts, and a heavy jacket. Talk to you next week. Bye for now.